Okay, we're going to begin with a quiz, right? It's waking you guys up. When does antiquity end and the Middle Age begin?
325 if you're Byzantine and 590-ish if you're Latin.
Oh, wow. Well, in Spain we're taught 476, but that's fine. There's not a right answer. When does the Middle Ages, of course those people didn't think, we're living in the Middle Ages, aren't we? They were not thinking that. But when does the medieval period end and modernity begin?
John Wesley. 1517.
1517?
1517.
Okay, good. 1517. Very Protestant answer. Thank you.
1660.
1660? What happens in 1660?
Enlightenment. Or 1682.
Oh, Enlightenment, yeah. In Spain we're taught, anyone want to guess what happens?
Earthquake in 1492.
That's it, 1492, yeah. When does late modernity or the postmodern era start? That's a little bit more difficult.
The fall of the Bastille.
The fall of the Bastille, possibly, yeah. Francis Schaeffer says 1912, the Armory show, an art show in New York. Well, anyway, my point here is to just say that dates are important. And even though we all know that in history it's not so easy to just nail down particular dates and say this is when things changed. However, they are useful, and I want to suggest that 1998 is a particularly foundational date in the history of the Christian religion en toto. Now, keep an eye on that date because I'm beginning at the end, okay? And now let me tell you the story of mission and disintegration, and I could add realignment in global Anglicanism from the 1960s through 2024. And let me give you a caveat here that these things are changing all the time, okay? I mean, just since I got the final edition of this paper in my email, or on my email to the rest of the team, there's already been huge changes in global Anglicanism, and that was just 2 weeks ago. So let's talk about theology. What happens in theology? Perhaps the main theological and ecclesiological and liturgical and thus missiological development in the Anglican world, communion, was the introduction of women's ordination. The first woman ordained to the priesthood in the communion was Florence Lee Tim Oy. She was ordained on 25 January 1944 by Ronald Hall, the Bishop of Victoria, Hong Kong, in response to the crisis among Anglican Christians there that had been caused by the Japanese invasion. To avoid controversy, she resigned her license, though not her priestly orders, at the end of the war. The first woman ordained to the episcopate in the Anglican Communion was Barbara Harris, an African-American woman of the Diocese of Massachusetts. She was ordained as a bishop suffragan in 1989. Since then, a number of provinces, predominantly white and Anglophone, have ordained other women as bishops. A number of provinces appear to allow for ordination of a woman as a bishop, but have not yet actually carried that through. The introduction of women's ordination was unacceptable to some Anglo-Catholics and to some evangelicals. Some of them tried to continue within their jurisdictions, requesting oversight from bishops who had not and would not ordain women, seeing it as an action that could call into question or even nullify apostolic succession. In England, a compromise was reached whereby congregations and their priests could request a provisional episcopal visitor, PEV, who were popularly known as flying bishops. This concept of episcopacy by affinity rather than territorial location would grow and become a key factor in global Anglicanism. Groups of Anglo-Catholics seeking reunion with the See of Peter had approached bishops of Rome requesting guidance. Some were from within the communion, while others came from separated churches known popularly as the Anglican Continuum or Continuing Anglicans. John Paul II had, in 1980, promulgated the pastoral provision, whereby an Anglican, or other Protestant for that matter, could be received into the Roman Catholic Church and then be ordained, again, with the proviso that they had not been Catholic at any time previously. This was a very interesting move by John Paul II, I've got to say. It was sort of a way of saying that while your Anglican orders are null and void, which continues to be the position of the Roman Catholic Church regarding Anglican orders to this day, the sense of vocation that you had, that God was calling you to ordain ministry, that was valid. A very curious move by Pope John Paul II. Since then, there have been a number of bishops from the Church of England and from other provinces as well who have entered into full communion with the Church of Rome. One of them was evangelical. Who am I talking about? Michael Nazar Ali, yes. Last time I hung out with him, that was in Kenya. And we went swimming in the Indian Ocean. It was a good time. Now, if women's ordination was the occasion for some Anglicans to find other pastors, a greater debacle was related to the question of human sexuality. This is the one that everyone knows about today. Could holy matrimony be celebrated by two persons of the same sex? And let me just remind, is everyone here Anglican? Do we have any non-Anglicans? Okay, good. In Anglican theology, the ministers of the sacramental rite, I'm just going to call it a sacrament, the ministers of the sacrament of holy matrimony it's not the priest. It's the man and the woman. They are administering the sacrament to each other, and if there is a priest there to say a blessing, it's that. It's to say a blessing and recognize that this union before God is valid in the eyes of the church. So, there's a question. Can holy matrimony as a sacramental rite be celebrated by two people of the same sex or the same gender? Were there ethical grounds anymore for barring non-celibate gay people from holy orders? Others answered that Scripture was very clear on that matter, that sexual relations between two people of the same sex were clearly prohibited and decreed as sinful. But revisionist scholars answered with novel reinterpretations of passages all the way from Genesis to Revelation. The issue reached a boiling point in 2003 when the Reverend Vicky Jean Robinson, a divorced man who was gay and living in a same-sex relationship, was elected bishop coadjutor of the small diocese of New Hampshire. The House of Bishops of the USA, against the advice of the Archbishop of Canterbury, who told them this will tear the fabric of the communion. And what did we as Americans do? We went on and did it anyway. For many evangelicals, this was a step too far. They had different opinions about women's ordination, but for them, Robinson's election was a clear violation of Scripture. Not to mention the position of Lambeth in 1998. There's that year, 1998. We're going to come back to Lambeth 1998 in a minute. But in 1998, Lambeth 110 had clearly said that the only context wherein sexual relationships were valid and permissible and indeed blessed was marriage between a man and a woman. It is difficult to know, without going into too many details, the matter would eventually lead to the birth of the Global Anglican Future Conference. Is it futures? Is it plural or singular? Does anyone know? It's Future Conference. Okay, good. GAFCON, which first met in Jerusalem in 2008. It also led to the secession of several dioceses from the Episcopal Church USA and the formation, along with like-minded Anglicans who already existed, of the ACNA, the Anglican Church in North America, in 2009. It is difficult to know how to describe GAFCON. It is not a rival to the Anglican Communion, really, because a large majority of the Anglican Communion is in fact part of GAFCON. But GAFCON has launched ministry initiatives, including missionary dioceses and even new provinces, like the ACNA, that overlap with the jurisdictions of the Anglican Communion. I'm thinking Canada, the United States, Mexico, Great Britain, continental Europe, and Australia, I think, New Zealand. I mean, there's probably some other ones, but there's a lot of them. So, what is GAFCON? Let's go ahead and ask the website. Let me just say something about this. I'm not digging on GAFCON here, by the way. This is not my purpose. But it's interesting to say that you belong to a conference. And I've been thinking about this for the last couple of days. We're at a conference. Now, the conference is going to be ended over tomorrow afternoon, and we're all going to go home, and the conference will not be around anymore. There could be another conference in a year, and some of us might be at that conference, but others of us might not. So it's just an interesting word. I actually looked at the etymology of conference, and it comes from to confer. That's the etymology of it, the origin, to confer. And that comes from the Latin meaning meaning that you're carrying a burden along with someone else. So maybe a conference is not such a bad word if you really get into the Latin of it. But let's go to the GAFCON website and see what they say. The GAFCON movement, okay, it's a movement, is a global family of authentic Anglicans standing together to retain and restore the Bible to the heart of the Anglican communion. Well, so this sounds like it's a movement to restore the Anglican communion, but then you have to ask, then how does that cohere or coincide with the founding of provinces that overlap? I'm not saying that there's no answer to this, but it's a question. We are founded on the Bible, bound together by the Jerusalem Statement and Declaration of 2008, and led by a primates council, which represents the majority of the world's Anglicans. The unfolding of the events of 2003, wherein the American province ignored the clear position of the communion, led to a further conclusion by other Anglicans. If they can do it, why can't we? Anglicans, like other Catholic Christians, there's a little c, like Dr. Smithers was saying, Anglicans, like other Catholic Christians, had an ancient tradition of territorial bishoprics. But if one province of the communion could, without any real observable punishment or discipline, simply ignore the mind of the rest of the communion, then why couldn't other Christians do that? It was clear then that the evangelical and Anglo-Catholic provinces could likewise ignore the ancient tradition of not crossing episcopal boundaries, and there would be no negative consequences. The Americans, and later the Canadians, and later others, had discarded an ancient principle in the name of justice. These others could discard another one in the name of mission and pastoral exigency, and they did. And this is where the word in the title comes in, disintegration. I hope it's not an overly negative word, disintegration, but I don't think that there's a better word to describe what we've seen in global Anglicanism. In sum, questions of gender and sex have been at the center of much of the theological development of the last decades. But there are theological issues. But these are theological issues. People will say, well, these questions of human sexuality are ultimately pastoral. It's about applied theology. It's about understanding society. But at the heart of all of these questions, and I'm not going to tell you which way to go on these things, although I'm guessing we're all going to go in the same direction, is a fundamental question of theological anthropology. What is a human? What does it mean for us to be humans? And if you cannot correctly understand what a human is, then all of your soteriology that comes after that will probably be compromised. Because if you don't know what a human is and what the problem of the human being is, then trying to discern how God is responding to that throughout history, and especially in the person of Jesus Christ our Lord, I'm not sure that it can be done. Okay, now we're going to switch over to jurisdictions. This is really, really sexy stuff. In 1979, this is going to be fast, but I want you to see, because we've heard some kind of depressing stuff about splitting up and disintegration and about deterioration of the quality of theology, of biblical theology. But at the same time, let me tell you some good stuff that's happening. There's a lot of growth and a lot of mission, right? Mission and disintegration. So this is a whirlwind tour of the growth of Anglicanism throughout the world since the 1960s. In 1979, the Church of Nigeria separated from the province of West Africa to become its own province. It is today the most numerous province in the communion. In 1980, the Spanish Reformed Episcopal Church and the Lusitanian Catholic Apostolic Evangelical Church were accepted into the communion. They are extraterritorial churches to Canterbury. If you want to really know what that is, ask me later, because it's really boring. Though both of these churches had been established well before they were admitted into the Anglican communion. In 1981, the 5 dioceses of Argentina, previously extra-provincial to Canterbury, became the province of the Southern Cone, later to be renamed the Anglican Church of South America. In 1995, 5 dioceses in Mexico were officially recognized as the Anglican Church of Mexico. In 1998, the Anglican Church in the central region of America likewise became an autonomous province of the communion, with its 5 dioceses of Panama, Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Nicaragua. At first, the idea had been floated that the other dioceses of Province 9, that's a regional administrative area of the Episcopal Church of the USA, that they also would become their own province in the Anglican Communion. That did not end up happening. I've asked why that didn't happen. The answer I got, and this is just hearsay, is because of pensions. But who knows? Is it true?
Yeah.
Okay, I thought it was true. Thank you. In 1992, the Episcopal Church of Rwanda separated from the province of Rwanda, Burundi, and Bogazere. In 2007, the name of the province was changed, replacing the word Episcopal with Anglican. The Anglican ordinariates were mentioned above. Let me go into this a little bit. Benedict XVI issued a papal judgment saying that groups of Anglicans who were coming into full communion with the Church of Rome, the Roman Catholic Church, they could establish their own personal ordinariates. Now, ordinariates are normally geographical. They're called dioceses, right? But these would be personal. That means that the parishes would be connected they would be connected to their ordinary, normally a bishop, but in this case, they don't have to be bishops. They're connected to their bishop because of an affiliation, right? In this case, they're former Anglicans. In any case, 3 of these ordinariates are established following that instruction given by Benedict. We'll leave the Catholics aside for a moment. GAFCON has branches or provinces in New Zealand, 2019, Brazil, 2018, Australia, 2015, and North America, 2009, that not only are not part of the communion, but also overlap with members of the communion, as I noted. The ACNA ordained a missionary bishop for the United Kingdom and Europe in 2017. In 2011, the Republic of South Sudan gained independence from Sudan. Sudan is largely Muslim and South Sudan largely Christian, with some communities practicing indigenous religions. South Sudan decided to use English as its main language as opposed to the Arabic of Sudan. These and other factors led to local Anglicans requesting recognition of the autonomous province of the Episcopal Church of South Sudan. This was granted by the Anglican Consultative Council and other authorities in 2017. In 2018, the Anglican Church of Chile, originally the Diocese of Chile of the Church of South America, was likewise recognized as a new province of the Communion, and both are members of GAFCON, incidentally. In 2020, a substantial rearrangement of the Episcopal Church in Jerusalem in the Middle East was concluded. That province had originally consisted of 4 rather disparate dioceses. Jerusalem, including Jordan, Palestine, Israel, Lebanon, and Syria. The Diocese of Egypt, including the Horn of Africa, Ethiopia, where Bishop Grant was. Is that correct, Bishop Grant? You were in Ethiopia largely?
Yes, which was part of the episcopal area of the Horn of Africa, which includes Ethiopia, Eritrea, Djibouti, and Somalia.
Excellent, thank you. Iran is a diocese that exists on paper, but it is barely functioning, if at all. And then the Diocese of Cyprus and the Gulf states, whose membership is almost entirely expatriate. So these were the original 4 dioceses of the Episcopal Church in Jerusalem in the Middle East. Egypt is able to withdraw, split into 4 dioceses, and that was recognized as the 41st province of the Communion under the name of the Episcopal Anglican Province of Alexandria. This took place in 2020 with the 4 dioceses being Egypt, North Africa, minus Morocco. For some reason, Morocco is part of the Church of England Diocese of Gibraltar in Europe. Maybe somebody can explain that to me. I don't get it. The Horn of Africa and Gambela, a region in Ethiopia. In February of 2021, a new Anglican jurisdiction came into being, the Anglican Network in Europe. It consists of the already existing Anglican mission in England, which also cared for churches in Scotland that had left after the Scottish Episcopal Church changed its canon on marriage to allow same-sex unions, and the newly formed Anglican Convocation in Europe. Initial clergy are from England, Scotland, and Portugal. In 2024, an additional network of churches called Anglican Missionary Congregations was allowed to enter the network. This is largely a group of African-sponsored churches throughout continental Europe. But let me just give you an idea of, I live in Spain, so this is what I'm used to over there. They all overlap with each other. None of these are territorial dioceses. And so like the Anglican mission in the Anglican mission in England has parishes in continental Europe, but the AME, Anglican mission in England, does not ordain women. The ACE, the Anglican Convocation in Europe, does. It's very congregational almost. Any congregation can kind of do what they want. They are Anglican and they are Orthodox. You have to sign the Jerusalem Statement, but they do have women's ordination. All of these have the same bishop. There's one man who's the bishop of all of these churches. Again, this is not a critique, but I mean, I just think of, the old phrase, we're building the airplane as we're flying. It's not clear to me over the long term how long this is going to be a viable way. But then again, it's a period of growth. So, I think with good leadership, it probably will work out fine. Let's talk briefly about Lambeth Conferences. Beginning in 1867, the Archbishop of Canterbury started to invite all Anglican bishops to his palace at Lambeth for consultation and adjudication. Lambeth Conferences were held in the following years of the 20th century: 1908, 1920, 1930. 1930 is significant because that is when the bishops at Lambeth said that it was okay for couples to use artificial birth control. Now, that might seem like a no-brainer today, but some theologians, some thinkers have said, what we're facing today in terms of human sexuality, that's actually the beginning of it. And you have a question, and I'm not telling you what I think on this, but it's a legitimate question to think about theologically. Once you compromise the unitive and procreative act of the sexual union, which is a sacramental act, then aren't you possibly compromising your entire theological anthropology after that? It's a question for discussion later. Anyway, so that was 1930. Then there was 1948, 1958, 1968, 1978, 88, 98. And 98 is the big one. This was presided over by George Carey. There were over 740 bishops present, including for the first time some women bishops. The 1998 conference is, even outside the Anglican world, considered by many to be a landmark in the history of global Christianity. It represents the first time that a global body of Christian leaders voted against the explicit will of the majority of wealthy, white, Western bishops. Quote, "What emerged was a major divide between conservatives and liberals. The global shift in Anglicanism was asserting itself. The post-colonial fight back with support from Western conservatives meant that the final Lambeth resolution was toughened with the insertion of a brief text declaring that, quote, homosexual practice is incompatible with Scripture," end of quote. Insofar as there is any official position of the Anglican Communion on the issue, this is it. But as has been demonstrated above, the so-called instruments of unity were either unwilling or unable to apply any sort of discipline to provinces that disregarded the Communion's position from 1998. Americans, and by extension anyone else, could completely disregard Lambeth, the primates meeting, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and the Anglican Consultative Council, and still receive invitations to the Lambeth Conference, something we were just talking about during the break. By 2008, the Lambeth Conference was no longer a conference where juridical and canonical issues were debated and adjudicated. Rowan Williams opted for practical training in, quote, effective, truthful, and prayerful mission. And he ruled out revisiting 1998's Resolution 1.10, cited above. He also emphasized listening to different voices, but by 2008, many conservatives had concluded that listening was a code word signifying a lack of discipline for the heterodox and even the heretical. Many conservatives, evangelical and Anglo-Catholic, believed that what was needed was decisive, disciplinary action, which was precisely what Williams had ruled out. Only around 670 bishops were present, as numerous bishops from the non-Western world decided not to attend. 4 Anglican primates announced that they were boycotting the meeting: Nigeria, Kenya, Uganda, and Rwanda. These are 4 of the largest, 5? What was the other one?
5 minutes. No.
Oh, 5 minutes. Okay, 5. I thought you were saying it was 5 provinces. I'm like, Okay.
Job, just doing my job.
Good job. So it was 4 provinces. And then other bishops just decided, I'm not going to go. So the attendance was significantly lower. This was called Indaba. Someone want to tell me what Indaba means? Is this a word that we know? Yeah.
Well, technically, in South Africa, it means getting people who disagree together in a room and getting them to talk until they reach a resolution. So this is not real Indaba what happened.
Mm-hmm.
There was no resolution.
Yeah. Thank you. Anyway, the Lambeth Conference continued to be carried out, the most recent one just a couple of years ago, but attendance has continued to decline. And the Lambeth Conference has never had any kind of canonical constitutional authority over the entire communion. There is nothing that has canonical authority over the entire communion. There's no figure like the Pope in Anglicanism, of course. We're much more like the Eastern Orthodox churches, actually, but kind of. In any case, the 2022 conference was a group. At this 2022 conference, this is the most recent one, a group called the Global South Fellowship of Anglican Churches, which we've heard about, sought to reaffirm that Lambeth 1998 1.10 was still the official position of the communion. However, the current bishop, Justin Welby, who, by the way, has announced that he's resigning. Does everyone know this?
Yes.
Yeah. This is the first time in a long, long time, many centuries, that this has happened. This is really unheard of. And there are also calls for the Archbishop of York to resign. Just to show, when I use the word disintegration, I think it's not an exaggeration. But here's a great commentary on, and Welby said, no, we can't revisit 1998. They just wanted to revisit it and have people vote yay or nay. And Welby said, we're not going to do that. And here's a commentary by someone who was there. It is no overstatement to say that the Lambeth Conference is in a moment of deep crisis. There are now emerging two Anglican communions, one in the Western world of America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Scotland, Wales, and increasingly England, which is accommodating a secular culture and giving up on biblical authority. The other chiefly in the global South. Together with those Christians in the Western world who dissent from secular culture and hold to the authority of Scripture. Presumably, the next Archbishop of Canterbury will call for a Lambeth Conference in 2032 or thereabouts. By then, the emerging division will be even more stark, and he will be forced to pick between the two. Rowan and Justin have tried to have it both ways, to keep everyone, quote, walking together, papering over fundamental differences while avoiding the taking of resolutions. But this cannot work forever. The next Archbishop has the opportunity to take a clear biblical stand. I suppose he does. I don't know who would want that job, by the way. I think about this sometimes. In any case, let me end with a note on demography and then some of the challenges coming ahead. Demography is destiny. The future belongs to them that procreate. The left-leaning progressive, and I almost hate to use the word liberal because it doesn't mean what it used to mean. Classical liberalism was quite a different thing than the sort of, I'm not sure what to call it, this kind of compulsory, we're going to force you to do things you don't want to do, that type of liberalism. Those societies are all dying. They're dying. They have very low fertility rates. And even if the countries have people coming into the countries and the populations are staying stable, which is what our situation in Spain is, the people who are coming into the countries usually don't have the same religious backgrounds and certainly not an affiliation for Anglicanism that we're talking about in the West. So demography really is destiny. And this actually is good news for the conservative and evangelical and Anglo-Catholic Anglicans of the world. They tend to be the ones who, even if they live in the West, tend to have more families and to have more children. What are some elephants in the room? What are some of the main problems? I was hanging out, and I'll finish up with this. I was hanging out with a colleague of mine, Dr. Kirk Sandvig, professor of religion at San Diego State University last night, and I was talking about this paper. He's like, that's a very broad topic, Dwayne. How are you going to do that? I'm like, I don't know, but I got the paper. And he said, well, what is it like for all of these, Africans and people in South America and in East Asia to call themselves Anglicans? Because, what is that? It's just it's a Latin word that means English. That's literally what it means. And I said, well, you know what? They like it. They like the word. And I said, it's not anti-colonialism, but it's sort of like a post-colonial appropriation. And he said, I don't know if the people will like that word appropriation. But I think that that's accurate. I think that they're saying, if you want to know real Anglicanism, you can find that in Kenya. You can find that in Chile. If you want real Anglicanism, you might be able to find it in a couple of places in England, but not like before. Okay, thank you very much.